Time travel didn't start with Back to the Future. Long before Marty McFly jumped into that DeLorean, filmmakers were already bending time in the strangest ways. Some were daring, some were cheesy, and some were so odd you'd wonder how they ever got made. But they all paved the road for the blockbuster we know today. So, what kind of cinematic time loops, paradoxes, and wild experiments came before 1985? Stick around, you're about to see some of the weirdest journeys ever filmed. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, 1949. What happens when Bing Crosby collides with King Arthur? You get one of the earliest Hollywood experiments in time travel that feels equal parts absurd and charming. Adapted from Mark Twain's famous novel, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court isn't your usual historical adventure. It takes a modern man, in this case, a smooth-talking American, played by Crosby, and hurls him straight into the world of knights, castles, and sword fights. The story is as playful as it sounds. Crosby's character, Hank Martin, is a mechanic who, after a knock on the head, wakes up in medieval England. Instead of panicking, he starts outsmarting the locals with his 20th century knowledge. He predicts eclipses, builds gadgets, and even sets up some early electricity. The twist? The movie plays it as a light-hearted musical comedy. Yes, Bing Crosby not only outsmarts King Arthur's knights, he sings while doing it. What makes this film so fascinating isn't just its age, but its tone. Hollywood in the late 1940s was experimenting with mixing genres, and here you've got medieval fantasy colliding with American vaudeville-style humor. The result? A film that feels like a cultural time capsule of its own. It's a reminder that time travel on screen didn't always need to be dark or philosophical. Sometimes it was just about a guy with a guitar accidentally reinventing the light bulb centuries too early. While it may not have aged as gracefully as later classics, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court showed audiences that time travel could be fun, flexible, and downright ridiculous. And in many ways, that playful spirit set the stage for the more polished experiments that followed. The Time Machine, 1960. If one movie set the standard for cinematic time travel before the 80s, it was this one. George Pal's adaptation of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine wasn't just another sci-fi flick, it was a cultural landmark. With Rod Taylor in the lead as the curious Victorian inventor, the film brought Wells' futuristic vision to life, with groundbreaking visual effects that wowed audiences in 1960. The plot follows Taylor's character as he constructs a lavish brass and leather time machine and ventures forward through the centuries. He watches London change around him, buildings rise and fall, and humanity transform. Eventually, he lands in a distant future where the peaceful Eloi live under the shadow of the underground-dwelling Morlocks. What starts as scientific wonder quickly turns into a survival story. What makes this movie unforgettable is how seriously it takes its own ideas. Unlike earlier comedies that treated time travel as a gimmick, The Time Machine leaned into philosophical questions. What happens when progress isn't really progress at all? What if humanity evolves, only to split into two species that can't escape their dependence on each other? The film also won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects, and for good reason. The sequences showing time speeding forward, mannequins changing outfits in a store window, seasons flipping in seconds, were mind-blowing for audiences at the time. They remain some of the most iconic depictions of time travel on film. While some of its 1960s optimism feels dated, The Time Machine still stands as one of the most important steps in building the cinematic language of time travel. Without it, the DeLorean might never have had such a slick road to drive on. Beyond the Time Barrier, 1960. Imagine flying into the future by accident and finding out the world has fallen apart. That's the unsettling premise of Beyond the Time Barrier, a Cold War-era sci-fi oddity that didn't have Hollywood's budget, but sure had its nerve. Released in the same year as The Time Machine, this little B-movie tried to tap into anxieties that were keeping audiences awake at night: radiation, global disease, and the fear that our own technology might undo us. The story kicks off with Major William Allison, a test pilot, who pushes his experimental jet past the speed of sound. Instead of breaking records, he breaks reality. When he lands, it's no longer 1960, it's 2024, and the Earth he knows is gone. The future is bleak. The population has been decimated by a cosmic plague. The survivors live in a domed underground city, and most people are mute, sterile, and terrified. Sure, the sets look like they were borrowed from a high school play, and the costumes are about as convincing as tinfoil armor. But that's not the point. The movie tapped into the raw Cold War fear that one accident, one experiment, or one stray launch could send humanity spiraling into extinction. The sterile survivors, haunted by the sins of the past, were basically a warning shot dressed up as pulp sci-fi. Critics at the time weren't impressed, but fans of cult cinema still talk about it. Why? Because it dared to say something bigger than its budget allowed. It was less about slick production and more about forcing audiences to imagine a future where humanity had messed up beyond repair. And in a strange way, that made Beyond the Time Barrier scarier than any giant monster movie. It wasn't about what lurked outside, it was about what we'd already done to ourselves. The Time Travelers, 1964. What if a lab experiment opened a window into the future, and stepping through was a one-way ticket? That's the hook of The Time Travelers, a 1964 cult sci-fi adventure that turned low-budget limitations into high-concept thrills. While it didn't have the polish of Hollywood epics, it had something else: ambition. The film begins in a small lab, where scientists create a screen that shows moving images of the year 2071. At first, it's just a curiosity, a chance to peek at what might come next. But curiosity quickly turns reckless. The team accidentally steps through the window and discovers they've crossed into the future itself. What they find isn't some gleaming utopia. It's a desperate, dying Earth. Humanity is split between peaceful survivors and savage mutants, and the scientists are stuck in the middle of a war they never asked to join. What makes The Time Travelers memorable isn't just the story, but the eerie ending. Without spoiling too much, let's just say the scientists do manage to get back, but not in the way they expected. The film closes with a chilling twist involving a time loop, suggesting that everything they've done may already be fated to repeat forever. For 1964, that kind of paradox-heavy storytelling was bold. The effects and costumes might look campy today, but the movie leaned into its weirdness, giving audiences something to think about long after the credits rolled. It wasn't about futuristic gadgets, it was about the haunting idea that once you start messing with time, you might not get a clean exit. Even though it never became a mainstream hit, The Time Travelers earned a loyal following among sci-fi fans and inspired a TV series called The Time Tunnel a few years later. It showed that time travel films didn't have to be grand or expensive to deliver a lasting punch. Sometimes, all you needed was a portal, a few brave scientists, and a story that dared to end on a chilling note. Journey to the Center of Time, 1967. If you thought time travel was risky, imagine your entire lab being thrown through the centuries like a runaway elevator. That's the wild premise behind Journey to the Center of Time, a 1967 film that's often overlooked, but impossible to forget once you've seen it. The setup is classic pulp sci-fi. A group of scientists working on advanced technology accidentally overload their experiment, and instead of blowing up, the lab itself becomes unstuck in time. Walls, desks, and all, the facility begins rocketing through different eras. One moment, they're in the prehistoric age dodging dinosaurs. The next, they're centuries ahead in a sterile, dystopian future. The film plays like a series of strange episodes stitched together, each stop in time giving the characters new dangers to navigate. There's no sleek DeLorean here, just a clunky lab full of blinking panels and scientists who have no idea how to stop the ride. That chaotic energy is exactly what gives it charm. The movie is less about polished storytelling and more about throwing audiences into the roller coaster of what-if scenarios. Of course, the budget shows. The dinosaur effects look suspiciously like reused stock footage, and the futuristic costumes wouldn't fool anyone. But there's something endearing about how hard it tries. The sheer audacity of taking a single set and making it tumble through millions of years of history makes Journey to the Center of Time a true oddball in the time travel canon. And then there's the ending, bleak, strange, and very much in line with the darker sci-fi of the 1960s. Like The Time Travelers before it, the film suggests that messing with time isn't something you just walk away from. You pay a price, even if that price is never fully explained. While it may never win awards for elegance, Journey to the Center of Time deserves credit for going all in on its concept. It proved that even a clumsy film could make time travel feel unpredictable, dangerous, and thrillingly weird. Planet of the Apes, 1968. Sometimes time travel doesn't need a flashy machine to hit you with its twist. That's what Planet of the Apes proved in 1968. At first glance, it looks like a straightforward sci-fi about astronauts crash landing on a strange planet ruled by intelligent apes. But by the end, audiences realized they'd been watching one of the most shocking time travel reveals in cinema history. Charlton Heston stars as George Taylor, an astronaut who believes he's stranded on some alien world. The society he encounters flips everything upside down. Apes are the dominant species. Humans are mute and enslaved, and Taylor is caught in a bizarre culture war. For most of the film, the time element is subtle, almost hidden. But then comes that unforgettable finale, Taylor stumbling onto the ruins of the Statue of Liberty, half buried in the sand. Suddenly, it's clear. This wasn't another planet. It was Earth's far future, destroyed by humanity's own hand. The reveal hit like a thunderclap in 1968. It wasn't just a twist ending, it was a warning. Audiences walked away shaken, debating not just the fate of the characters, but the fate of their own world. At a time when nuclear fears were high, this wasn't just sci-fi entertainment, it was social commentary wrapped in a time-bending narrative. What makes Planet of the Apes so powerful as a time travel story is its restraint. There's no elaborate time machine, no explanation of how the astronauts jumped into the future. Instead, the story lets the world itself deliver the gut punch. Sometimes the scariest time travel isn't about gadgets. It's about realizing you've overslept history and woken up in your own nightmare. Slaughterhouse Five, 1972. Can a man become unstuck in time? That's the bizarre and haunting premise of Slaughterhouse Five, the 1972 adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's famous novel. Unlike the clean timelines of most sci-fi adventures, this one plays like a fragmented dream, following a man who experiences his life in scattered pieces. The main character, Billy Pilgrim, drifts between moments with no control. 1 second, he's a young soldier in World War II, trapped in the horrifying firebombing of Dresden. The next, he's a middle-aged optometrist, living a comfortable suburban life. Then, without warning, he's transported to a distant alien planet where time itself is understood differently. The story is less about how time travel works, and more about how it feels, confusing, uncontrollable, and deeply human. What makes Slaughterhouse Five stand out is its refusal to play by the rules. There's no single timeline, no clear beginning or end. Instead, it mirrors the way memory actually works, fragmented, messy, and full of painful reminders we can't escape. The film dares to suggest that maybe we're all unstuck in time, reliving moments whether we want to or not. Visually, the movie shifts between tones and settings with a fluidity that was groundbreaking for its era. It's not a fun adventure like The Time Machine, it's a reflection on trauma, fate, and the strange way life never really moves in a straight line. And while it wasn't a box office smash, it gained a reputation as one of the most faithful attempts at translating Vonnegut's unique style to film. At its core, Slaughterhouse Five is a reminder that time travel isn't always about exploring the future or past. Sometimes it's about being trapped inside your own memories and realizing that even those can feel like prisons. Time after time, 1979. What happens when H.G. Wells chases Jack the Ripper into the future? That's not the setup to a joke. It's the actual plot of Time After Time, a 1979 cult classic that combines thriller, romance, and time travel adventure in one strange package. The film kicks off in Victorian London, where Wells is showing off his newly built time machine. But just as he's preparing to test it, his dinner guest is revealed to be none other than Jack the Ripper. The killer hijacks the device and escapes into the 20th century. Determined to stop him, Wells follows, landing in 1979 San Francisco. The result is both thrilling and oddly charming. A historical figure grappling with fast food, feminism, and modern urban chaos while hunting a ruthless fugitive. What makes Time After Time stand out is its mix of tones. On one hand, it's a fish-out-of-water comedy with Wells bumbling through contemporary life. On the other, it's a suspenseful chase film, with David Warner's sinister Ripper lurking in the shadows. And layered overall, that is a surprisingly tender romance, as Wells falls for a modern woman played by Mary Steenburgen. The movie balances its thrills with humor and heart, creating something that feels both pulpy and surprisingly sophisticated. Critics praised it for its originality, and it's often remembered as one of the smartest uses of time travel before the 80s boom. It even influenced later films like Somewhere in Time and, in a roundabout way, Back to the Future, both of which mixed love stories with time-jumping adventures. At its best, Time After Time shows how versatile time travel can be. It's not just about science fiction. It can be suspenseful, funny, romantic, and a little terrifying, all in the same reel. And for a film that could have easily been dismissed as a gimmick, it holds up as one of the most imaginative oddities of its era. The Final Countdown, 1980. What if a modern warship found itself on the eve of history's most infamous attack? That's the big what if at the heart of The Final Countdown, a 1980 thriller that mixes military spectacle with a bold time travel premise. The film stars Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen, and it follows the USS Nimitz, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, as it mysteriously slips through a time warp. Where do they end up? December 6th, 1941, the day before the Pearl Harbor attack. The movie plays its premise with a straight face, leaning heavily on authenticity. Real U.S. Navy ships and aircraft were used during filming, giving the production a level of realism that most sci-fi films couldn't dream of. The tension comes from the crew's moral dilemma. If they have the power to stop the attack, should they intervene? With their advanced fighter jets and modern technology, they could change the course of history forever. But meddling with time has consequences, and the film makes the crew wrestle with those choices. Visually, The Final Countdown is impressive, especially for the era. Watching modern jets face off against vintage Japanese Zeros creates a surreal clash of timelines. The film doesn't rely on flashy effects so much as the sheer audacity of its scenario. It's less about paradoxes and more about the heavy weight of responsibility when given knowledge of the future. While some critics found it slow, the movie gained a strong cult following, especially among history buffs and sci-fi fans who loved its big, unanswered questions. Do you risk altering history to save lives? Or do you step back and let events unfold? The Final Countdown doesn't give easy answers, but it makes you think, and that's what a good time travel story should do. Somewhere in Time, 1980. Can love itself bend the rules of time? That's the romantic heart of Somewhere in Time, a 1980 film that trades in paradoxes and sci-fi gimmicks for pure emotion. Starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour, it's one of the most unusual time travel films ever made because it doesn't use machines, science, or portals, just sheer willpower and longing. The story follows Richard Collier, a playwright who becomes obsessed with a portrait of a woman from 1912. That woman is Elise McKenna, a stage actress whose beauty and mystery capture his imagination completely. Determined to meet her, Richard hypnotizes himself into believing he is back in her era. Against all logic, it works. He awakens in 1912, and the two fall deeply in love. What makes Somewhere in Time unforgettable is its tone. It's not about saving the world or fighting mutants. It's about human connection and the lengths we'll go to find it. The time travel itself is almost secondary, a means to explore the aching themes of nostalgia and destiny. Christopher Reeve gives one of his most tender performances, far removed from the cape and tights of Superman, and Jane Seymour radiates old-world elegance. The film wasn't a box office hit on release, but it grew into a cult classic over the years, embraced by fans who were drawn to its haunting mix of romance and melancholy. Its sweeping score by John Barry only added to the atmosphere, turning it into a favorite for anyone who believes love can defy time itself. Somewhere in Time reminds us that not every time travel movie has to be about paradoxes and science. Sometimes it's about longing, memory, and the dream that maybe, just maybe, we could reach across the decades for one perfect moment. Timerider, The Adventure of Lyle. Swan, 1982. A motocross racer versus cowboys. Yes, that's really the story. Timerider, The Adventure of Lyle Swan, is one of the strangest blends of genres ever put on film. Released in 1982, it stars Fred Ward as Lyle Swan, a dirt bike racer who stumbles into a government experiment during an off-road race. Instead of finishing his course, he crosses into a time warp that drops him smack in the middle of the Old West. The setup is pure pulp. Lyle's futuristic motorbike immediately makes him a legend and a target among gunslingers who have no idea what they're looking at. Some think he's a demon, others think he's some kind of miracle, but most just want to get their hands on his bizarre machine. What follows is part Western showdown, part fish-out-of-water comedy, and part science fiction madness. The film doesn't hold back on its absurdity. Watching a motocross rider tear across the desert chased by horses is as ridiculous as it sounds, and that's exactly the point. Instead of trying to justify its time travel with complicated science, Timerider leans into the fun of smashing two completely different worlds together. While it was never a mainstream success, the movie developed a cult following precisely because of how unapologetically strange it is. It's the kind of film that might make you roll your eyes one moment and laugh out loud the next. But beneath the silliness, there's a clever little idea that the past and present don't mix cleanly, and dragging technology into the wrong century can cause more chaos than convenience. In a way, Timerider is the perfect oddball to close out this list. It's messy, goofy, and unforgettable. Proof that before Back to the Future polished the formula, filmmakers were willing to throw time travel into the wildest scenarios just to see what happened. Time travel in film wasn't always sleek DeLoreans and smooth paradoxes. Before 1985, it was musicals in Camelot, doomed soldiers unstuck in time, and even motocross bikes tearing through the Wild West. Each of these oddities added a piece to the puzzle, shaping how we think about bending time on screen. Which one of these films surprised you most? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and buckle up, because the past, present, and future of cinema are always closer than you think.